We're going.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Monday morning. It's really morning here where I am in California. Good morning, Penny, on day 19.
Day 19. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I think it's really cool when we line up guests like tomorrow. I'm super excited that we're going to be talking to Ernest Morrell, one of my favorite educators.
Mm-hmm.
But I also say I enjoy days like today where we just decide we're going to pick a topic and just kind of riff. And so let's do it. What are you thinking about?
Well, my daughter, who teaches fifth graders, is going to be having them in the classroom for the first time in more than a year at the
Wow.
end of April. And so we started talking about a 4-week unit that might launch talk. So definitely writing. She's primarily a writing teacher, but how are we going to surround a unit with lots of time for kids to collaborate, even if they're 3 feet away, but time when they need to talk to each other? Because the thing that's absent, right, are kids that have been home for so long are craving interaction with adults. And I sent her an article this morning that's in the Times on this man talking about his 7th grade son who doesn't have a friend, and it's a new school, and he feels so alone. And how many kids feel that because they're not in the halls, and the kids are coming back to a school where they're not going to have lunchroom. They're going to eat lunch in a class. The teachers are going to all now travel, so the kids never leave their pod, which of course is for contact tracing. And there isn't that these aren't good reasons, but that it's going to make collaboration really important. I think lots of talk with other kids their age.
Well, first, if I'm planning a unit, I want Penny Kittle to be my mom. And,
No, it doesn't work. If your mom, she got to reject everything I said.
Of course. So tell me a little bit about this unit. Like what's Hannah thinking about?
Well, okay, so this is what we did this morning is via text. We started talking about when they first come back, something that will really help her understand what they've been through. And we were both talking about how we don't like this learning loss narrative that is out there. Oh, they've lost an entire year because they've gained a lot of things and they've had experiences, but we want them to somehow bring those to their learning. So we started this, and this is what I'm doing. I'm writing a letter to her class, and we're doing them like graphic novels. All right. So we're doing a lockdown letter. What are 5 things that I did during the lockdown that I could represent either in sketches and words, or they could just write the letter? But she's going to write a letter to her class. Dear class, these are 5 things that I did. And so this morning when we were talking, it was really easy to start brainstorming moments that I might want to use, but sketching them I just immediately am like, I can't do that. So I went to a favorite source, An Illustrated Life. There are usually 2-page spreads from artists that are writers. So it's just like, what do they capture in both pictures and in words? And I go here because I have all these pages marked that help me make sketches. Like my 2nd granddaughter was born, so I want to do a sketch of a baby. So I go to this page because she's a new mother, right? And then I had one marked because we spent a lot of time hiking this summer. And so I know I can't do this, but what I did in my notebook is really pathetic. But can you see it there? It's an imitation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
an
yeah.
exact imitation. I just made the girl have a long braid like Hannah does. So I'm using this, and I had written down paddleboarding because it's one of my lovely things I love to do. But then I remembered this moment with Maisie when I had her in the kayak last summer, and she'd never been in a kayak. And a dragonfly came and landed on the edge of the kayak, and dragonflies are huge, and kids and bugs, and you don't want her actually to scream and jump around because then we're both going in. But I said, oh, Maisie, because she hadn't noticed it. I said, a dragonfly has come to visit. And she was like, oh, grandma, right? Because it became like wonder instead of terror, because she's like a lot of little girls who are like bugs. But at any rate, I had no idea how to draw a dragonfly, and I didn't want to search the book looking for one. So what do I usually do? I'm going to show you on my screen. I go to dragonflies and I just look for pictures of them so that I can draw one. I mean, it sounds so simple, but I teach my students to do this because now in that box, You see, it's not like it's a great dragonfly, but it's enough of a picture. So that's how we're starting. 5 moments from lockdown. What do you want your teacher to know about your life in lockdown?
First of all, it strikes me that could be an activity at any grade level, not just, what is she, fifth or sixth grade?
5th grade.
Fifth grade. And how non-threatening it is in a way for kids who may have not been writing for a very long time to kind of ease their way back to the blank page.
We were trying to capture how many of them might have been involved in video games or other cartoonish kinds of things, so that a graphic novel is like this nice, or a sketch. I also said you could, especially if you've got older kids, like one of mine is mass, so I went to photographs. You could have them choose 5 photographs and write next to 5 photographs. But the idea of them choosing to show you something that mattered. But I like this additional layer we did just out of happenstance. She's of course going to write to them, but then I'm another generation from her. So now you've got an older person's vision of what it was like in lockdown, and she could have her students ask parents or grandparents if they want to participate. Like, what's lockdown been like for the community that she's in? So anyway, that was kind of our easing them back in to bringing something that represents their life, and then having conversations in, they come into the room. So what's on your, and you don't have to share all of them, but what's one thing you want to share from your life in lockdown?
And generate some interaction. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first day or two. Then what?
Well, as you and I talked, what do we both think about when we think about a unit of study in a genre? Because we want to do story, right? What Hannah and I talked about is that we want the kids to write as collaborative partners. That whole writing next thing about, collaborative writing is one of the strategies that's powerful. So if she wants her kids to write in twos, then story's a natural fit. And they can write fiction or non, because we don't care which one, but they want to study these big things: character, setting, plot. Right? So then it begins, like, you can start framing it around what kind of quick writing do we want them to practice day after day? What kind of study are we going to do? Which things do they need to study? And we were making notes. Dialogue practice, conflicts between characters that can drive a plot. So you could practice dialogue one day and the next day put one of your characters in conflict with another character, right? So you'd extend your dialogue practice across more than one day. We had under characters, do we want them to write 2 voices, have a multi-narrator story, because they end the year reading Wonder, and Wonder has 6 narrators. And it's a terrific, she loves teaching that book with kids, but to prepare them for the way voice changes and perspective changes, maybe make these stories 2 characters. Settings, we put down a photograph, quick write. Many short stories begin with a setting. So maybe we could bring in some quick short stories that show setting, because the setting has to have something that has to do with the story, right? You don't just drop a setting in. So being able to study that. Oh, and we also wrote down, they could do voice recordings to try to give the actual writing voice, like listen to themselves reading the writing, the drafting as they're going along later in the unit.
So I'm wondering, and I love that. I love all of that, but I'm wondering how that fits with, the idea that when you start a unit, you think, what's the finish line? What is it when I get to the end of this unit? How am I going to measure my students' progress? So I'm wondering if you've even gotten to that point yet where you thought about, a month from now, here's what our kids might be able to do.
Yeah. So the first thing is that I talked to her about the lapse in 180 days, because I said, especially they haven't been, number one, writing together. And so you're going to want to have an assessment that talks about the kids reflecting on what did you learn from your partner about writing, and be specific to writing. Okay, where did you contribute to this piece the most? Was it the character, the settings, of the plot, and like, what did you learn about these elements, rather than the piece of writing? some of the things we were trying to learn. And so the other one we talked about, of course, is scene, because a building block of narrative is a scene. So you could design an assessment where they have to compose a scene individually. That
Mm,
could be an assessment.
mm.
And she's still kicking around a lot of these things because she's got another week, I think a week and a half before she starts teaching them this way. But the idea of the finish line is they know a lot about story. They can generate a story. They could be in writing groups looking at other stories. And then the talk is another assessment, making eye contact,
Yeah,
taking turns,
yeah.
that stuff.
So when you mention the lapse in 180 days, then that makes me think of, starting with baby steps, like the 100-word story,
Yeah, and the 34 word
um,
story. Is it,
34-word
or is
story
it
that we've done
35?
in workshops, 100-word story. There's some books on microfiction,
Yeah, flash fiction. Yeah.
flash fiction. There's websites that are dedicated to that. Um, the thing we've always done together and separately is have kids write to photographs.
Yes.
Here's a weird photograph. Tell us what's happening with these people.
Yeah.
It's kind of a way to kind of build rapport with another writer, and kind of coming up with a story together. It was interesting. Last time I did that in my class, I gave them some photographs of people they've never seen before in kind of weird situations, and they wrote stories. But some of my students took their own photographs of them, but made up fictional stories to fit the photographs of them. So that was kind of fun for them to change the story of that day or the story of that moment. Some actually wrote the actual stories of those moments.
Yeah, one thing that I loved doing was a photograph of people in conversation, and then the class decides what's the crime they've committed and what are they talking about.
Yeah,
They loved that sense of a crime, and there's like
yeah,
drama. So you've got a plot, and you've got the dialogue's got to serve who these people are.
yeah. So let's talk about dialogue for a minute, because a lot of times, kids, when my kids first try dialogue or come to me, they write just dialogue, 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 dialogue. It just goes on and on and on and on. And it's often it's, not for
Hi,
effect
how are you?
or,
Hi, hi.
yeah, right. And it's not properly punctuated, which is a secondary concern initially. But, that idea of modeling, I like to have them like, one of the things I do is go out in the world and overhear a conversation, like eavesdrop and capture that in your notebook and bring it tomorrow. And then they have to like, or sometimes I have them would write a scene. What's a dialogue you would love to hear between two people you know? So I would love this English teacher to tell that kid in the back row, and the kids then create their own, fictional dialogue that they would love to have happen in the real world. That one's kind of a fun one
Yeah, I
to
like
do.
that one. I haven't tried that. I was thinking about the sending my kids out, and several of them did eavesdropping in the cafeteria. And sometimes the adult stuff they captured was like, oh, you hadn't overheard
Yeah,
that. Um,
yeah,
but I think there's a lot here, and I start thinking about, so the dialogue stuff to me could come into the mini lesson section. So when I think of a unit, I start thinking of what are the books I'm going to talk about, what are the quick writes we're going to do, what are the mini lessons, because the creative part of supporting them as they make these stories is, are we going to storyboard them, right? Their plots, but which comes first for you? Do you begin with characters? Do you begin with a setting? Do you begin with a plot? How do you think about it when you teach story?
well, I think like when you start small, here's a photograph, give me 100 words.
Mhm.
You kind of capture a little bit of each, and then I think as you start to come up the ladder and start doing,
Mm,
what did we do in 180 days? Capture a school moment. And we only looked at three things, right? We look at voice, sensory detail, and dialogue. So in the week that we're writing those pieces, those are the three mini lessons that we're working on. I don't know, and I don't know that this is the right answer, the wrong answer. I don't know about the sequencing of that. Is it better to start, well, let's set a scene first?
I
I
gotta admit,
don't,
I don't know either, but I always start with characters.
Yeah.
Give characters voices, we look at the details of who they are, and we look at how they talk because it reveals character. And that voice details, I was thinking of my backboard in my room where we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 mini lessons per each of those. And I kept these big poster papers up with examples of the texts we studied and where they fit, what we're
Right.
looking at, because those are, I call them the pillars of writing good scenes. And so if, and I don't know that it's right, because I think there are lots of kids who can imagine a scene solely through the setting, like the Civil War, that kid I was talking to you about who really wanted to write about it. So I don't know, but if I started with characters, I would want them, a 34 word story of this character, or I could angle any of these activity kinds of things towards my purpose, which is characters drive stories, right? And characters' decisions, the conflict, the what's the trouble, right, is often between the character and something. Could be his environment.
And how do you establish it too? I mean, I think one of the fun things that I did with kids, I think you've done it as well, is, find a line, a word, a phrase, something small that says a lot about the character, right? I think that's when really good writing is like, you could tell just by the wise ass remark, or you could tell by, I don't know, a move that the character makes. It says a whole lot about the character
I remember
without saying it.
in a Nancy Atwell workshop when she showed us this thing she does with her students, what's in the characters' pockets. And I took it back, and I had ninth graders at the time, and she was with, seventh and eighth graders, but even Hannah's fifth graders. What's in your character's pockets? Because as you think about that, is that somebody who keeps the gum wrapper? Is that somebody who keeps the key to the house? Because, I just think it creates some of those small that says something about them.
Mhm, mhm.
They are moments.
And I think then when you get to dialogue, I think you have to show them what it looks like. I think, could you put up the Jeff Anderson piece?
Yeah.
So, one of our favorite people is Jeff Anderson, who is not only a teacher, but also an author of YA. And that's his book, Zach Dela Cruz, Me and My Big Mouth, and which is a middle school.
Yeah. Look at the
Um,
stacks of chocolate bars.
yeah, he's in charge of the fundraiser for the school or something. On my screen, though, yeah, there you go. Keep going a little bit. All right. So there is a passage with dialogue from the book. And what I would do is I would have kids surround this in partners or in small groups. And I would ask the kids, what are the decisions the writer had to make here about dialogue? What do you notice about the moves and the decisions, right? There's not always attribution, right? How do you establish, because kids will say, I said, she replied, I said, she replied, I said, she replied, all the way through. So I'd want them to notice, the craft of establishing dialogue. Here you have a third person comes
Okay,
in near the.
before you go any farther, could you read this? Because I'm trying to read it while you're talking.
Okay.
I kind of want to know what it says.
Dad, this is a scene where he's talking, the young junior high kid is talking to his dad. Dad, you know how you always say you want me to be more involved at school? Yeah, he smiled, tilting his head. I ran my hands along the broken mosaic tile tabletop. It felt slippery on the bright tile and rough in the stained grout. I'm in charge of the candy sale for the whole sixth grade. What? Dad's mouth fell open. When did this happen? Yesterday. Oh, so when were you planning to tell me? I don't know. I ran my hands along the rough grout. I just wanted to be sure. Sure of what? Are you done, sir? An old lady in a dark green apron reached between us. I wanted to leave the burger, I'd finish it, but I couldn't eat another bite, so I nodded. The waitress snatched our tray and wiped the table, leaving behind the smell of bleach. I just wanted to be sure it all worked out and stuff. I sipped my Coke. So you're sure now? Pretty much. I twirled my straw. I'm proud of you. I always knew you'd be a great businessman, and I forgot the closing quotation mark there.
You can add it in.
Yeah. So
you want me to notice, you would ask me, or you would ask your students first, what do you notice?
yeah. What decisions did he make there?
Well, one of the things I really like is that this interrupting just straight dialogue with the little details there and here. So, an old lady in a smock, I'm like, what? Reach between us. Who's this character? Oh, leave my burger. I immediately know who it is. So, just
Mhm.
a couple details, and you can see it continues on. So, you've actually got all of this that's not dialogue, but it's like, I wanted to say, but I couldn't, so I nodded. There's actually some like still interaction or communication. So I think one of the decisions I like is there's not too much, there's just the right amount. Ran my hands along the rough grout. Otherwise, as I say to kids, it's all a silent movie, right? If you have only description and no dialogue, it's a silent movie. If you have all dialogue and no visuals, it's like listening to a podcast. You want both.
Well, and if it's all dialogue with no interrupters, no visuals, it becomes tedious to read too.
You lose
Like
track, don't you sometimes? I lose track. Who's talking?
I
Gonna
think
have
the
to go back.
reader needs a break, right? And I think
Yeah.
it actually heightens the dialogue when you drop in those little pieces of setting between them. And so I might have them now, take this and just go emulate a short scene of maybe them sitting at the table with their mom or, something like that, and have them try to emulate this kind of dialogue. Also the attributions, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And I like the sipped and twirled, like there's some motion tilting his head that adds to that. Those attributions carry a little bit of energy in that way.
Mm, mm. But what did you notice? I think is a more, what I do is I'd have them mark this stuff up too, right?
Mhm.
Take that back to their own notebook and then try something.
Yeah.
Now I would say this is not the one and only dialogue passage I'd have them study, because I don't see, for example, beginning attribution. I don't see mid attribution where
Mhm.
the punctuation rules change,
Or
right?
when people interrupt each other, how that
Right.
looks. Something I do a lot with you, so we could practice.
I just record one of our transcripts.
Right? Yeah. Um, I like it. And I think how there's so much teaching embedded in that. Like when you're paying attention to what are the marks and what's their purpose. And, we have kids glue that in their notebooks and put notes right in their notebook. The punctuations inside the quotation mark. So that they keep it. Because I like to be able to say to a kid, okay, go back to your dialogue practice because you don't have it all together here.
I also want to say, thinking about Hannah and her trying to come up with this unit, how hard it is at the beginning of your career to do this. And I know she has you, but that idea that we've talked about earlier of having someone else professionally to bounce off of and to plan. And I know it goes without saying, but that she's let herself enough lead time that she can still kind of start planning and thinking about it. I think a lot of times, I'll be honest, early in my career, I was so busy with this and that and coaching and going to school and teaching that, it'd be Sunday and the unit starts tomorrow. And I'd be sitting down going, oh, what am I, and that never ended well. So making sure that you kind of plan out ahead of time, I think is really, really smart of her.
Well, and to take advantage of resources, I have given her many books, PD books, which she can't read all of them right now. But I highlight a couple things like here's a lesson on storyboards. Those are really helpful. And then she can
Yeah.
try it out. But I think
Yeah.
there has to be this balance between the organic planning that teaches us the kinds of decisions we need to remember and somebody handing you a planned unit,
Right.
because for her to keep the agency, nobody knows really what kids are going to be like that have been out of a school for a year and what kinds of supports they're going to need. And so when I talked her through it, I just said, no pre-planned unit is going to nail this for you. This is really work you've got to do. And what you've got to do is take lots of notes during class on what you notice about talk, because this talk is one of your focus points. Yeah, they're producing writing, but talk is something you're trying to develop. Who's not talking? Who's talking? Right?
Yeah, it just comes back to it's art. It's art to think about who's sitting in my classroom, what's going to connect with them, how am I going to get them to do this, how am I going to do them to get them to do that, which resources should I pull, which resources should I create,
Mhm.
and then of course, I think the most important thing, especially early in your career, is when the unit's over, to make sure that you step aside and go, okay, this worked and this didn't work. And if it didn't work, it doesn't mean abandon it. It means maybe you need to approach it a different way or tweak it somehow. But the best teachers I've ever known are all very reflective after the unit's over as well. Not just asking the kids to be reflective, but the teacher being reflective as well.
Absolutely. And I think about how, building in, you're looking at 4 weeks and you build in, when am I going to give them feedback on their writing? Because I want to do that mid-process, not just at the end. When am I,
Mhm.
you have to like kind of anticipate, I'm going to need time to do this. And I just think it's all so much harder for teachers right now. As I listen to, Hannah's going to be a traveling teacher now because they want to keep them in, and that has its own complications. She's going to be rushing to get to them. And what's
I
that?
just love to see how it goes for her. And I'm just so heartened she's not one of those teachers who writes the lesson on the back of the Starbucks napkin on the way to school. You know?
So let's end with, what are you reading?
I've been reading some really heavy stuff. So I actually went back last night and I said, I need to read something light. And I'm rereading a book that I used with teachers at the UCLA Literature Project 25 years ago, because it's one of my favorite lighthearted books. It's called I Am One of You Forever, Fred
I know that
Chappell.
book.
And this is a series of vignettes about a young boy growing up in North Carolina. And each chapter is a different vignette about a different family member. And it's funny and weird. There's some magical realism in it a little bit. But I just love Fred Chappell. If you don't know him as a writer, I recommend him highly. And I have a number of his books, but I would start with I Am One of You Forever. I love this book.
I think that's the only one of his I ever read. Maybe because,
Yeah.
what else are you reading? You said a couple things.
Well, no, I'm just reading the book we talked about earlier. I just started reading Wonderworks and the first chapter is pretty heavy. It's about when and where was literature invented. So that's pretty interesting, though.
The moves in literature. So this is the one I started just recently. The Cost of Knowing. Okay, Brittany Morris is the author that I absolutely loved. This one, Slay, which is another YA. So if you didn't read Slay, then it won't matter because I don't believe these two are connected. But I saw this one just came out, so I downloaded it, had to read it. And then I am that middle of the night reader I've told you. So I've had two things that I've been reading a lot in the middle of the night, depending on what I'm thinking about. One is Middlemarch, George Eliot. Now, George Eliot's one of the people I studied in my master's program. And so I read everything she'd written. But the thing about Middlemarch is people say it changes as you age. So here I was reading it as a young 20-something in graduate school and was Dorothea Brooke the entire time. Well, now that I'm reading it as a grandmother, I am definitely reading that book differently. I've read it twice before now, so this is my fourth time. So I've really got the feel of where it's going, but I love the journey from a different perspective. The other one is Anne Lamott's brand new Dusk, Night, Dawn. This just came out, and it's called On Revival and Courage. I've actually resisted starting it because I know I will scream past it because I just read her stuff. I inhale it like a breath. But she always makes me think pretty deeply, and I like that. So
I love Anne Lamott.
I
I
do.
follow her on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a book is a different book each time you read it. That's a topic for another day because that's a full blown topic. So we want to thank everybody for coming today. Tomorrow, we get to chat with one of our favorite people and educators, Ernest Morel,
Yeah.
who I've learned a ton from over the years. And so I'm super psyched for that. And we hope you all have a good week. We hope we see you again tomorrow. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Absolutely. Bye, you guys. Hang in there.